I watched as ash fell off of my cigarette. I raised it up to my mouth and took a long drag from it, almost immediately coughing from it. I'd just started smoking since after what felt like forever. I turned 18 years old. I'd been waiting on this day forever. Finally, I'm an independent guy and could do whatever the hell I'd like. I looked up to my friends, Clark and Brandon, while I coughed my lungs out. Their eyes met mine and both busted out laughing. "Can't take the hit, huh?" Clark asked as he mockingly took a drag from his cigarette. They'd both turned 18 a few months ago, so they'd been smoking for longer than I have. I didn't want to start until I could buy the packs myself. I rolled my eyes at him and took another drag, just to prove myself. Luckily, this time I didn't cough and I felt fine. My body was starting to grow used to the taste of cigarettes. "Leave him alone," Brandon said. "You can't help that he's a little baby." I rolled my eyes even harder, and then stood up so that I was now level with him. My heart started to feel funny, and my body began to feel numb. I leaned back onto the brick building behind me to regain my balance. This caused both of them to bust into even bigger laughter. I sighed and cocked my head towards the building I was leaning on. "Are you guys ready to go inside?" I asked. "Or are you guys babies?" I grinned as I said the word babies. Clark rolled his eyes and Brandon laughed even harder. They both nodded, and we headed to the entrance, where a large, muscular man with cold, hardened eyes was standing. Clark and Brandon both flashed their IDs to him and walked past him. He narrowed his eyes at me. "Are you lost?" he said. I kept myself from rolling my eyes. If I did that, I definitely wouldn't get in. Instead, I reached into my back pocket and snatched my wallet from it. He watched me as I quickly pulled my ID from my wallet and showed it to him. "I have my ID," I said with a half smirk. The bouncer rolled his eyes and nodded his head towards the building. Grinning, I walked with Clark and Brandon inside. The air was musty and dry. Smoke hovered in the air. Multiple men were sitting at tables, all holding cigarettes or cigars in their chubby hands. Their eyes were all fixed on the same thing. I looked over to where they were looking. A slim girl with blonde hair wrapped herself around the pole, tossing her head backwards every time. Cheers and whistles busted out from the crowd, and almost simultaneously, money started to fly everywhere. "Well, let's go sit down, boys," Clark said. Brandon and I nodded in response. We all sat down at one of the tables further away from the stage. My eyes watched the dancing girls. My heart started to flutter, and I could feel my adrenaline going. After a few moments, the girls started to notice us. Who wouldn't notice us? The three young-looking boys sitting at a table gawking at half-naked women. We were an easy target to these women, and they definitely knew it. A woman finally made her way towards us. She was dressed in sexy black and purple lingerie that showed just enough. She had silky, luscious blonde curls that bounced against her chest while she walked. Her eyes met mine and locked onto them the whole time that she walked towards us. My heart began to race even faster somehow. After what seemed like an eternity, she was finally standing right in front of me. Her eyes were still staring into mine. She knew exactly what she wanted. She also knew exactly what she was doing. Sadly, I knew what she was doing as well, but I was so lost in her trance that I couldn't pull myself out of it. "How are you doing?" Her voice was soft, just like I'd imagined it would be. I went to speak, but suddenly I couldn't. My mouth was as dry as ever. All I could do was look up at her. Everything seemed to be 1,000 miles away, and all that mattered was her and I. I was completely captivated by her. She knew it, too. The corners of her lips tugged upwards into a sly smile. "Well, how are you doing?" I heard Clyde's taunting voice. I shook myself out of the trance she'd put me in. I'm okay," I croaked out. Both Clyde and Brandon snickered, and I shot them a look that pretty much says, "I'll kill you." "Well, I can help you feel better than okay," she replied. My heart started racing. Was she going to be my first lap dance? I'd never gotten one before, and Clyde and Brandon had promised me that I'd get one on my first visit to the club. Ignoring my sweaty palms, I decided to accept whatever her offer was. I was beyond excited to even be in the presence of this beautiful girl, and I was not going to mess up any chance I had. She stuck her dainty hand out towards me, and I took it into mine. I stood up as she started to pull away. As we were walking away from the table, I turned my head so that I could see Clyde and Brandon. They both gave me a thumbs up and big grins. This was it. I was finally getting a lap dance. We continued walking through the club, slowly, heading towards a large velvet curtain that was hanging from the ceiling to separate a huge portion of the room. We came to an abrupt stop right before the curtain. She turned to face me, her green eyes piercing me. She bit her bottom lip seductively. "It's going to be $200, she said. I couldn't help but gasp. I didn't know it was that much money to get a single lap dance. She must have noticed my dismay because she raised her eyebrows at me. "Honey, we're not cheap. You're paying for top-of-the-line sex." I nearly choked on my own spit. I did not know that's what I was agreeing to. Did I want to go through with it? I looked her up and down. Her body looked absolutely amazing, and I'd probably be called a fool and made fun of if I didn't go through with this. There's no way Clyde or Brandon would ever let this go. I'd hear about it for the rest of my life. I swallowed hard and reached into my back pocket. I grabbed my worn-out wallet and opened it up. I slowly took out $20 bills until I'd added up to $200. She watched me as I counted the money. I handed it to her, and she took it with a smile. She took my hand back into hers and gestured towards the curtain. I followed her past it. We were now in a secluded area. It looked kind of like dressing rooms at a clothing store. There were several hugely sized rooms closed off with curtains. I ignored my doubtful mind and followed her to the last room on the left. As she opened the curtain, I was surprised to see a queen-sized bed with silky sheets on it. I went ahead and sat down on it, my eyes never leaving her. I expected her to start taking her clothes off, but I was very quickly disappointed when she kept them on. "1 second, let me go grab her," she said. Before I could even muster out a single word, she had disappeared past the curtain, and I was left sitting alone in the room. Oh well, I thought to myself, she's beautiful, but I'm sure they all are. Just remember, if you don't do this, you'll get made fun of forever. I decided to just go with it and took my pants off as quickly as I could. A few moments later, I noticed 2 sets of legs behind the curtain. I straightened up and took a huge breath in. It was time for me to do it with a stripper, or prostitute, whatever. I almost lost my mind when the curtain opened. My mother's eyes were looking back at mine. Hers grew as wide as saucers at the sight of me, and her mouth fell open. It took almost all of me not to throw up right there. She was dressed in the same lingerie as the other woman. "Mom?" I stammered. She gulped and bit her bottom lip. "Mikey, what are you doing here?" she demanded. All I could do was shrug. "Clyde and Brandon brought me here for my 18th, I explained. She inhaled and closed her eyes. She took her head and stood there for a moment. The girl I thought I'd be sleeping with was looking at us both with a disgusted look on her face. "Give me a moment with my son, please," Mom said. The girl's eyes grew wide, and my mom rolled her eyes. "We're going to talk, Candy." Candy sighed in relief, and without another word, she left the room. My mom hurried to the bed and snatched a sheet off so that she could cover herself. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "The hospital fired me weeks ago," my mom explained. I took a job here at the Leap and Leopard so I could support us." She looked down at the ground the whole time. I couldn't find any words. What was I supposed to say? "So, you've been prostituting yourself?" I asked. Not my best moment, but oh well. She chewed on her lip once again. "Yes," she finally replied. "I have been prostituting myself." "This is so you can go to college, though, Mikey." She trailed off. Neither of us knew what to say. My mother was a prostitute now. What the hell am I going to tell my friends?